Your CRM contains records. Your actual business happens in relationships. LinkedIn holds the graph. Dynamics 365 holds the process. Neither alone tells you what's really happening. Most organizations treat these as separate systems. They're not. They're two halves of the same problem. This episode is about the architecture that connects them, not as a feature, but as a structural shift in how modern sales actually works. We'll move from the old model of manual data entry to the new model of autonomous relationship intelligence. Why your CRM is blind. Your Dynamics 365 sales environment holds what you know about customers. It doesn't hold what's true about them. There's a difference. What you know is what you've typed in. A contact record shows a job title, a company, and a last activity date. But what's true is what's happening right now in the market. That prospect just got promoted. They changed jobs. They're engaging with your competitor. None of that is in your system when it happens. It's locked in someone's browser on LinkedIn. The gap between what your CRM knows and what actually matters is where deals slip away. That gap is the cost of your architecture. LinkedIn has that data in real time, but it's locked behind a browser. Getting it into your CRM requires manual work, third-party tools, or APIs that weren't designed for scale. Your sales team compensates by living on LinkedIn, then manually logging back into Dynamics. Two systems, two versions of truth, double work. The cost isn't just time, it's decision-making based on stale data. A contact record hasn't been updated in 2 months. The seller doesn't know the relationship has cooled. They don't know the decision-maker was replaced. They don't know the company just had layoffs. So they send an email based on assumptions that are no longer true. The message lands wrong. The response never comes. It's missed signals. It's relationships that fade because nobody saw the change happening. It's forecast misses because you're looking at opportunity stage instead of relationship health. It's deals that slip into the lost category when they could have been saved with the right intervention at the right time. This is the blind spot. Your CRM is a database of records, but your actual business is a network of relationships. Those relationships exist on LinkedIn. They exist in email threads. They exist in meeting transcripts. But your CRM doesn't see them. Your CRM only sees what a human thought to log in, which is almost never the full picture. The problem isn't new. Organizations have been struggling with this disconnect for years. What's changed is that the tools to fix it now exist. LinkedIn's APIs are mature. Dynamics 365 has relationship intelligence built in. Power Automate can orchestrate the flow, Copilot can synthesize the signals, agents can operate autonomously. But they only work if you rethink how you architect the connection. It's not about bolting LinkedIn onto Dynamics 365 as a feature. It's about designing a system where the two are structural halves of the same whole. One side holds the process, the other side holds the graph. Together they tell you what's actually happening. That requires understanding the disconnects that exist today and why they persist even when the technology to fix them is available. The three disconnects. The blindness we just described isn't one problem. It's three problems stacked on top of each other. Each one creates friction on its own, but together they create a system that actively resists integration. The first is the data disconnect. LinkedIn's API exposes relationship signals like job changes, engagement metrics, and mutual connections. Dynamics 365 stores customer records with names, titles, and last activity dates. These are two different data models describing the exact same relationship, but they don't automatically sync because there is no native bridge between them. What happens next is predictable. Sales teams either build the bridge manually or they use third-party tools that operate in a gray area between approved and unsupported. The manual approach is slow. A seller finds a prospect on LinkedIn, notes the info, switches to Dynamics 365 and types it in. Or worse, they just forget to do it. The third-party approach works until it doesn't. LinkedIn might change an endpoint, or the tool gets its access revoked, or the vendor simply goes out of business. Either way, the data lives in two places. Neither is the source of truth, and both are slowly degrading. The second is the process disconnect. This is where the real damage happens. Let's say a prospect on LinkedIn just got promoted. This is information that should trigger action inside your organization immediately. The opportunity assigned to one seller should maybe be rerouted to another person who has a relationship with the new decision maker. The sales strategy for that account needs to shift, and the competitive positioning should adapt. Someone should flag it as a re-engagement opportunity right away. But none of that happens automatically. There is no process that says, when a contact's role changes on LinkedIn, here is what we do. The information exists on the profile if someone happens to look at it, but your CRM is blind to the change. Your opportunity record sits in the same stage it was in last month because nobody knows the landscape has shifted. The organization keeps executing the old strategy against a new reality, and the deal slips away. The third is the intelligence disconnect. Your CRM calculates opportunity probability based on deal size, sales cycle stage, and seller activity. That is a useful signal, but it is not a complete picture. LinkedIn calculates something different called relationship strength. It looks at engagement patterns, mutual connections, and message activity. These are independent calculations of value happening in separate systems that never talk to each other. Here's the problem. Your CRM's probability calculation should be informed by LinkedIn's relationship strength assessment. A $500,000 opportunity with a weak relationship has different odds than one with deep connections across the buying committee. But your CRM doesn't know the difference. LinkedIn knows the relationship strength, but it doesn't know about the opportunity. You are forecasting with half the data. These three gaps compound. A missed signal becomes a missed re-engagement opportunity, which then becomes a lost deal. A lost deal leads to a forecast miss, and a forecast miss leads to a failed quarter. The cost is exponential. The old solution was to treat Sales Navigator as a separate tool. Sellers would use it for research and then manually log their findings back into Dynamics 365. It was better than nothing, but it wasn't good enough. It still required manual work and created two versions of the truth. Most importantly, it didn't trigger an organizational response. The new solution is architectural. LinkedIn data flows into Dynamics 365 as a continuous stream. It isn't a separate source of truth, but a live signal layer that feeds into the CRM. Relationship health becomes a native capability instead of a bolt-on. Process triggers happen based on LinkedIn changes, not based on what a seller remembered to log in. Understanding these three disconnects is the foundation for redesigning the system. The architecture that fixes them is what we are building toward. LinkedIn APIs, what's actually available, so we know the problem. The architecture is broken. The question becomes, what are you actually working with to fix it? LinkedIn publishes APIs, and it is important to state this upfront because the assumption most people have is wrong. They think LinkedIn is a closed platform where everything is locked away. It isn't. But it is also not an open playground where everyone gets equal access to everything. Access is tiered. That matters more than most teams realize when they are planning an integration. At the bottom tier, you have consumer APIs. These are available to basically anyone for things like sign in with LinkedIn or basic profile sharing. These work for consumer applications and are well documented, but they are mostly useless for what you are trying to do. You can get someone's name and headline, but you cannot get engagement signals or job change history. You can't get the insights that would actually inform your sales strategy. Above that sits partner APIs. This includes Sales Navigator, Recruiter, and the Marketing Developer Platform. These are restricted. You don't just sign up and get access. You go through an approval process where LinkedIn reviews what you are building. They evaluate whether it aligns with how they want their platform used. If it does, they grant you access. If it doesn't, you're out of luck. Then there is a tier that most organizations never interact with: compliance APIs. These exist for regulated industries like financial services, healthcare, and legal. They have additional restrictions and require formal partnerships. They are designed for scenarios where the data handling requirements are so strict that you need LinkedIn's direct involvement. Here is the practical reality that most organizations figure out only after they have spent months building something. You probably cannot build a custom direct integration against LinkedIn's core data. It isn't because you aren't smart enough. It's because LinkedIn controls access to protect the professional graph. They built Sales Navigator and Recruiter for a reason. Those products are the official channels, and going through them is the only realistic path. This is where rate limits enter the conversation. LinkedIn does not publish its quotas publicly. You find out what your limits are by building an app, going through the approval process, and then hitting the wall. Your app gets a specific quota, and so does each member using it. If you make a request that exceeds that quota, you get an HTTP 429 error. Too many requests. That isn't an error. It's a signal. It's LinkedIn's way of saying, stop, you are done for today. The 429 response includes a header that tells you exactly when you can try again. If you ignore it and hammer the API anyway, the throttling gets more aggressive and your requests slow down. This is by design. It isn't a bug, it is a feature. It is how LinkedIn prevents one organization's integration from degrading the platform for everyone else. The quotas themselves aren't arbitrary. They are calculated to allow reasonable usage while preventing abuse. A sales team of 50 people using Sales Navigator should be able to sync leads into Dynamics 365 daily without hitting limits. An organization trying to scrape all of LinkedIn's data would hit the limits immediately. That is the point. The authentication layer is OAuth 2.0. You request specific permissions called scopes. You might say, I need to read profile data, or I need to write to activity history. LinkedIn approves only the scopes you actually need. If you request too much, your app gets rejected during review. It is a deliberate constraint that prevents over-privileged integrations. What this all means is that you are not starting from a blank slate when you design an integration. You are starting from within boundaries. Those boundaries are there for reasons. They protect the network, they protect member privacy, and they protect the integrity of the data. The unrestricted path, where you could build whatever you want and pull whatever data you want, does not exist. For the purposes of your architecture, that is actually good. It means the path you need to follow is the one that LinkedIn has already designed. Sales Navigator, CRM Sync, Lead Sync, and Compliance APIs are not limitations. They are the scaffolding the platform provides. Sales Navigator, CRM Sync, the APIs exist, the tier system is set, the constraints are clear. Now we need to move the data. For most organizations, that means Sales Navigator, CRM Sync. This is the official bridge, it's the sanctioned path. It's what LinkedIn and Microsoft built together specifically for this moment, connecting Sales Navigator with Dynamics 365 Sales. Here's how it works. The sync runs daily. It looks at your Sales Navigator account, identifies the leads and accounts you've marked or engaged with. and pushes them into Dynamics 365. No manual work, no custom connectors, no HTTP calls to undocumented endpoints, just configuration. The mechanics are straightforward. You enable it, you map the fields, the sync happens on a schedule. Your CRM stays current. But here's the problem, or at least a critical detail about how the data flows. For most fields, it's one directional. LinkedIn feeds Dynamics. You get the contact name, title, company location, and the LinkedIn URL. You also get engagement signals. You see if the prospect is active on LinkedIn, if they've looked at your profile, and how many mutual connections you share. All of that flows in one direction. However, and this matters for discipline in your process, certain fields sync both ways. Lead source, lead status, custom fields you've configured. This means your CRM can be the system of record for qualification state. A seller marks someone as not qualified in Dynamics, and that signal syncs back to Sales Navigator. The system begins to reflect a shared truth instead of two separate databases. The volume constraint is where most organizations feel the pressure. The limit is 1,000 leads and contacts per user per month. Not per day, per month. 1,000. That's a hard cap. When you hit it, LinkedIn could allow unlimited sync. They could open the floodgates. But in reality, they do the opposite. They enforce the 1,000 lead limit because it changes how you think about sales. It forces a question. Which leads actually matter? If you can only sync 1,000, you stop treating LinkedIn like a database dump. You start treating it like a targeting system. You get selective, you focus, you apply judgment. For most sales teams of reasonable size, 1,000 leads per user per month is plenty. That's 40, 50, or 60 leads per day if you're aggressive. It's enough for active selling. It's not enough for passive bulk imports. That's the point. The system respects your existing Dynamics 365 security architecture. A seller only sees leads they have permission to see. If you've configured security roles so that someone can't view a particular account, Sales Navigator Sync respects that. It doesn't bypass your governance. It works within it. The data mapping is simple. Names, titles, companies, locations, and LinkedIn URLs come across. Engagement signals come across. You see how active someone is on the platform. You see whether they've viewed your profile, which is a signal that they've at least looked at who you are. You see the mutual connection count, which is genuinely useful for account-based selling. The practical benefit is immediate. Sellers spend less time on data entry. They don't have to manually transcribe LinkedIn profiles into Dynamics. They don't have to copy and paste job titles or company names. The system does it. That's time reclaimed. That's mental energy available for actual selling instead of clerical work. But the strategic benefit is what matters more. Your CRM stays current with LinkedIn activity without manual intervention. When a prospect engages on LinkedIn, that signal flows into your system. The engagement appears in the activity timeline. The relationship health calculation includes it. Your organization sees the signal. Because the signal exists in your system, it can trigger action. A workflow can notice the activity and alert the seller. A manager can see the engagement pattern and coach accordingly. This is the foundation. Not advanced, not fancy, but real. It's the bridge that closes the data disconnect. Power Automate and custom connectors. Sales Navigator CRM Sync solves the straightforward case. You want to move leads from LinkedIn into Dynamics 365 on a daily schedule using an official integration? Done. But not every use case fits that mold. Sometimes you need custom logic. You want to enrich contact records with data that comes from LinkedIn but isn't part of the standard sync. You want to trigger actions in Dynamics when a LinkedIn profile changes. You want to combine LinkedIn data with information from other systems in ways that the out-of-the-box integration doesn't support. That's where Power Automate enters. Power Automate is fundamentally an orchestration engine. It can take data from one system, transform it, and send it somewhere else. It can make decisions based on conditions. It can run on a schedule or respond to events, and it can call external systems, including LinkedIn, through connectors. There are two patterns worth understanding here. The first is the custom connector pattern. Here's how it works. You build an API. This API wraps LinkedIn's endpoints and adds your own business logic on top. Maybe it handles authentication in a specific way. Maybe it applies some filtering or transformation. Maybe it handles error cases that the standard API doesn't address. You build the API. Deploy it somewhere accessible, and then expose it as a connector in Power Automate. Now any flow can use that connector without having to know about the underlying API complexity. The connector abstracts it away. Someone building a flow doesn't need to understand OAuth or rate limits or endpoint paths. They just drag the connector into their flow, configure it, and it works. This is powerful because it means non-technical people can use sophisticated integrations once someone technical has built the connector. The second pattern is the HTTP connector pattern. This is more direct. Your flow makes raw HTTP calls to LinkedIn's API endpoints. You build the authentication yourself. You handle the response passing yourself. You manage rate limits yourself. This gives you flexibility. You can do anything LinkedIn's API allows. But it requires more engineering. You're building lower-level logic directly in the flow. Most teams start with the HTTP pattern because it requires less infrastructure. You don't need to build and maintain a separate API. You just write the logic in Power Automate. But as you scale, as you build more flows doing similar things, you often find that the HTTP pattern leads to duplication. That's when you move to the custom connector pattern. You extract the common logic, Build it once as an API, expose it as a connector, and then all your flows can use it. But here's where constraints matter again. Power Automate flows that call external systems must complete within 100 seconds when they're used as a synchronous tool. 100 seconds. That's the timeout window. If your flow is still running after 100 seconds, Power Automate terminates it. The flow fails. The tool that called the flow doesn't get a response. This constraint is critical when agents are involved. An agent can use a Power Automate flow as a tool. The agent makes a request, waits for the response, and then uses that response in its reasoning. But the agent is also operating within a time budget. If the flow takes 110 seconds, the agent request times out, the whole thing falls apart. So synchronous flow design becomes a discipline. You keep the flow fast. You make the LinkedIn API call. You get the response. You return it immediately if you need to do something slow. A complex database transformation, a long-running calculation, multiple sequential API calls, you decouple it. The synchronous part accepts the request and queues it for processing. It returns immediately with a tracking ID. The asynchronous part, running separately, does the actual work in the background and stores the result. This adds complexity to your architecture, but it's necessary complexity. It's the reality of building at scale. Batching helps manage API calls. Instead of updating one contact at a time in a loop, you batch 100 contacts into a single request. This counts as one call against your quota instead of 100 calls. It's dramatically more efficient. Data loss prevention policies deserve mention here. DLP policies restrict how data can flow through connectors. You configure a policy that says HTTP connectors can't be used with sensitive LinkedIn data. You block export of contact lists to unsanctioned external services. These policies prevent leakage. They prevent a flow from accidentally sending prospect data to the wrong place. And then there's the governance question. Using scrapers or unauthorized APIs to pull LinkedIn data violates their terms. Using official APIs through sanctioned connectors doesn't. The distinction is sharp, it's not gray, it matters legally and commercially. Custom integrations are powerful, but they're also where your governance matters most. Dynamics 365 native integration. We've looked at the APIs, the official sync, and how to build custom connectors, but there's something most people miss. Dynamics 365. Sales already has LinkedIn capabilities built right into the core. You don't need to build a single thing. You don't need Power Automate. You don't need a line of custom code. The features are already there. They're just waiting for you to turn them on. This is where your organization should actually start. Not with complex integrations, not with custom orchestration. You should start with the native features that Microsoft and LinkedIn built together. The first piece is the LinkedIn Sales Navigator card. This lives directly inside your contact and lead forms in Dynamics 365. When you open a contact record, you see the standard fields like name and phone number. But right next to them is a card showing the live LinkedIn profile. It shows their current role, their job history, and how many mutual connections you share. You never have to leave Dynamics. You don't have to open a new tab or search for them manually because the context is already there, integrated into the screen you're using. This isn't just a static screenshot of a profile embedded in a frame. It's a live connection. When a prospect updates their job title on LinkedIn, that change shows up on the card immediately. If they post an update, you see it. It's real-time information, not old data that was pulled once and then sat there getting dusty. The second capability is Team Link. This solves a massive problem in account-based selling. You're working an account and you know who the key players are, but do you know if anyone else in your company already knows them? Team Link answers that. It shows you which of your colleagues are already connected to that prospect on LinkedIn. This helps you in two ways. First, it finds warm introductions so you can stop sending cold messages. Second, it prevents those awkward moments where 3 different people from your team reach out to the same person at the same time. Team Link stops that duplication before it happens. The third feature is lead and contact creation. You find someone in Sales Navigator who looks like a perfect fit, and you create them as a lead in Dynamics with one click. The system pulls the name, title, company, and LinkedIn URL to build the record for you. It even runs duplicate detection so you don't end up with 5 versions of the same person. It saves time and it keeps your data clean. The fourth piece is activity sync. When a prospect sends you a message or an email, those interactions show up in the Dynamics timeline automatically. You don't have to log them yourself. The relationship history stays complete. A seller can look at a record and see the whole story. Not just the emails, but the LinkedIn messages and connection requests all in one sequence. To use this, you need Sales Navigator Enterprise licensing. You'll have to enable the features and map your fields. But once that's done, they just work. No API calls, no custom flows. It's native product capability designed for exactly this moment. For most teams, this is the right place to begin. Master the native features first. See what they can do and find where the gaps are. Only after you've pushed the out-of-the-box tools to their limit should you start building something custom. Native features solve the data movement problem, but they don't answer the deeper question. What does all this data actually mean? Relationship health, the signal, not the metric. So the data is flowing, leads are syncing, and records are enriching themselves with LinkedIn info. The system is finally aware of what's happening, but awareness isn't the same as understanding. Understanding comes next, and it happens through a feature called relationship health scoring. The system looks at every bit of activity tied to an account. It looks at the emails, the phone calls, the meetings, and the LinkedIn messages. It analyzes the patterns. How often are you talking? When was the last time they replied? What's the tone of the conversation? It takes all of those signals and turns them into a single score. This score isn't based on a feeling. It's a weighted calculation. And those weights matter because they reflect how your team actually sells. In this model, an email might be worth 3 points while a phone call is worth 4. You might decide a meeting is worth 7 points because meetings move deals faster than anything else. You could even set a LinkedIn profile view to 1 point for early stage interest. The system doesn't force these numbers on you. You define them based on what actually moves the needle for your business. Beyond the points, the system learns what normal looks like for your company. Normal might be talking to a hot prospect once a week or checking in with a long-term account once a month. The system builds a baseline. When the frequency of communication drops below that line, it creates a signal. If a prospect you talk to every week suddenly goes silent for 20 days, that's a signal. The health score will drop to reflect that change. Recency is a huge part of the math. A call from last Tuesday carries way more weight than a call from last year. This stops old activity from making a dead relationship look healthy. You don't want one great meeting from 3 months ago to hide the fact that the prospect has stopped responding. The calculation prioritizes what is happening right now. Then there's sentiment analysis. The system looks at the actual words in your emails and call transcripts. It checks the tone. Are they excited? Are they hesitant or frustrated? The sentiment feeds the score. 3 enthusiastic emails about a proposal are worth more than 3 short dismissive replies. The score shows you that difference. All of this results in a grade. Poor, fair, good, or excellent. These aren't guesses. They are data-driven assessments. An excellent relationship has frequent, positive, recent engagement. A poor relationship is defined by silence or negative feedback. But here's the most important part. This isn't about replacing your judgment. It's the opposite. Humans are actually pretty bad at tracking patterns across hundreds of different relationships. A sales manager can't keep 50 accounts in their head and remember which ones are cooling off, but the system can. It tracks everything at once and points you toward the ones that need help. The health score is a signal for you to interpret. If a strategic account shows a declining score, that should start a conversation. Why is it cooling off? Is there a competitor in the mix? Is your contact just busy? A manager with that signal can ask much better questions. A leader looking at scores across the whole company can spot trends before they become problems. This is different from automation. You aren't telling the system to reassign a deal just because a score dropped. That would be trying to replace the human. Instead, you're making the invisible visible. The score is just information. What you do with it is still a human decision. The architecture here is live. The score updates the moment a seller logs a call or a prospect replies to an email. When something happens on LinkedIn, the score changes. It's not a report you run once a week. It's a real-time view of your business. You see the pattern as it forms, not weeks after it's too late to do anything. Your judgment is still the driver. But now, it's informed by data that used to be invisible. Copilot for sales, from insight to action. Visibility is only the first part of the problem. You can see the health of a relationship. You can see the activity flowing in. You can see patterns across your entire portfolio, but seeing is not doing. Visibility without action is just noise. That's where Copilot for Sales enters the architecture. Copilot is an orchestrator. Its job is to take relationship data, LinkedIn signals, CRM history, and Outlook interactions and synthesize them into something a seller can actually use. It isn't a report. It isn't a dashboard. It isn't another thing you have to check. It's an immediate conversational insight that appears where you're already working. Let's look at how this works in practice. You're preparing for a call with a prospect. Usually you'd spend 30 minutes researching them by pulling up LinkedIn in one tab and email history in another while checking internal notes. Now you just ask Copilot, prepare me for my call with Sarah Chen at Acme Corp. Copilot does the work. It pulls her LinkedIn profile to show her current role and recent activity. It scans your recent emails to understand the context of the conversation. It looks at the opportunity record to see where the deal stands. Within seconds, it returns a briefing. It isn't a data dump. It's a narrative. It tells you who Sarah is, what you've been discussing, and what she might be thinking about based on recent changes in her role. It even lists your internal advocates. This is synthesis. Copilot isn't creating new data. It's reading information that already exists in your system and presenting it in a way that's actually useful in the moment. Email drafting works the same way. You want to respond to a prospect, but you want it to be personalized. You tell Copilot you need to follow up with Marcus about the budget conversation from last week and ask it to keep the tone friendly but focused on next steps. Copilot reads the thread, it understands the relationship dynamic, it knows what was discussed. Then, it drafts something that sounds like you but is informed by the full context. The email lands differently when it references something specific from your last talk. It shows you are paying attention. It flows from what you actually know about the person instead of being a template with a name inserted. Opportunity summaries follow this same model. Copilot pulls together the account context, the stage of the deal, and the risk factors. It tells you what's happening in natural language. It doesn't say, stage 3, $250,000 last activity 3 days ago. It says, this deal is moving, but your relationship with the technical buyer is cold. The financial buyer is engaged, the champion is responsive but stretched. If the technical buyer doesn't re-engage in the next 2 weeks, this flips to a loss scenario. The next best action is where Copilot becomes prescriptive. Based on relationship health and the competitive landscape, it suggests what should happen next. It isn't a list of options, it's a recommendation. It might tell you to follow up with Lisa directly because the committee isn't moving things forward, and she has the authority to decide. It suggests using a specific angle about the implementation timeline because that's what is actually holding them back. The architecture behind this is what matters. Copilot isn't hoarding data or creating a separate system of truth. It reads from the sources you already have, like Dynamics 365, LinkedIn, and Teams. It only sees what the user is permitted to see. It respects your security roles. If a seller doesn't have access to an opportunity record, Copilot won't share insights from that record with them. The access boundaries stay in place. This means Copilot isn't replacing seller judgment. It's amplifying it. The seller still decides how to approach the prospect and when to push. But they're making that decision with better information. They see the full picture instead of fragments. They work from what's actually true instead of what they can remember or have time to look up. The effect compounds. Sellers spend less time on research and more time on relationships. They spend less time in browsers and more time in conversations building trust. The work shifts from information gathering to decision making. Human capability improves when the tool does the work humans are slow at and hands back the judgment humans are good at. Sales agents, autonomous research and qualification. Up until now, we've been talking about systems that amplify what a human can do. Copilot waits for a question. A seller asks, and Copilot synthesizes. A human interprets the data. The human remains at the center of the loop. The next layer shifts that dynamic, not because humans become less important, but because entire classes of work become automated. The sales agent is a Copilot studio agent that runs autonomously. It doesn't wait for a seller to ask a question. It doesn't need a human prompt. It operates on a schedule or on triggers. When conditions change, it acts. Here's the operating model. A new lead arrives in Dynamics 365. This might be someone who filled out a form on your website or someone imported from a campaign. The moment that lead record is created, the sales agent wakes up. It doesn't wait for a seller to notice. It doesn't depend on someone finding time to research. It starts working immediately. The agent researches the company. It pulls information about their market position, recent news, and funding activity. It maps the buying committee. It identifies the likely decision makers and blockers based on the industry. It scores the opportunity based on fit. It asks, does this company match your ideal customer profile? How urgent is their problem? How well positioned is your solution? The agent uses LinkedIn as a primary signal layer for this analysis. Job changes matter because they indicate changes in priorities. When a company hires a new VP of operations, that's a buying signal. Someone in that role is likely evaluating tools to help them operate more efficiently. New connections show organizational movement. Engagement patterns show who is active in the market. If an account that's been dormant on LinkedIn suddenly has activity, it could indicate a hiring cycle or a strategic shift. There are 2 specific agents to watch. The Sales Development Agent goes live in July of 2026. This agent specializes in the SDR workflow by finding leads and qualifying them for handoff to AEs. The Sales Research Agent goes live in April of 2026. This one digs into market data and competitor activity for deep account intelligence. The output they produce is structured. It isn't a wall of text. It's organized information designed for human decision-making. You get a research summary explaining what the agent found. You get a confidence score. You get a recommended next action. It might tell you to escalate because the fit is exceptional or to deprioritize because the opportunity isn't real. It provides a list of stakeholders with reasoning for why those specific people matter. This is the shift. Sellers don't have to do the research. They get a brief and a strategy. The work that used to take an SDR 2 hours, researching an account and figuring out who to approach, an agent completes in seconds. The output isn't always perfect. Sometimes the agent misses context a human would catch, but it's good enough to be useful. And it's fast enough that a seller can act on it immediately. The time math is real. A human SDR might spend 30 minutes researching a prospect before they're ready to reach out. An agent does it in seconds. When you multiply that across 100 daily leads, the impact is massive. But the real impact isn't just time saved. It's the shift in what humans do with that time. Instead of research, they prospect. Instead of data gathering, they build relationships. The agents don't replace sellers. They handle the work that was always in the way. The orchestrator pattern. A single agent can handle a narrow task well. But real sales processes aren't narrow. They're complex. They require research, qualification, and strategy development. You need customer data and market context and competitive analysis all at once. When one agent tries to do all of that, it becomes unfocused. It gets bogged down because it tries to hold too much in its reasoning at once. And the output suffers. The solution is to stop thinking about a single agent doing all the work. Instead, think about multiple specialist agents, each good at one thing, coordinated by an orchestrator that decides which agent should do what. Here's how the orchestrator pattern works in practice. A new account arrives in Dynamics 365. This could be a company that signed up for a trial. or a target account your sales leadership wants to pursue. The moment that record is created, the orchestrator agent wakes up. It doesn't do the research itself, it delegates. It routes the account to a research agent that specializes in gathering intelligence about companies, looking at market position, funding, news, and organizational structure. At the same time, it routes that same account to a qualification agent to see if they match your ideal customer profile. In parallel, it sends the data to a strategy agent that looks at competitive positioning and recommends the best approach. 3 agents working at the same time on the same account, each one doing exactly what it was built to do. The orchestrator watches. When all 3 have completed their work, it collects the outputs. The research agent returns a company overview and an org chart. The qualification agent returns a fit score with an explanation, and the strategy agent returns recommended positioning and talking points. The orchestrator synthesizes all 3 into a single, coherent brief for the sales team, not 3 separate reports that someone has to read through and piece together. A unified narrative. Here's what we know about this company. Here's why they're a fit. Here's how we should approach them. The orchestrator doesn't do the work. It decides who should do it, in what order, and how to combine the results. This is the critical distinction. The orchestrator is a coordinator, not a performer. This pattern scales dramatically. You could have 10 specialist agents, 20, 50. Each one focused on a specific domain like lead research, account enrichment, or opportunity scoring. The orchestrator routes work to the right specialist without overloading any single agent or creating a bottleneck. The orchestrator uses decision logic that makes the routing intelligent. If an account has an annual contract value over $1 million, it goes to the enterprise agent. If it's marked as a renewal opportunity, it goes to the renewal agent. If it's early stage with unqualified fit signals, it goes to the disqualification agent. The orchestrator reads the incoming data and makes routing decisions based on the characteristics of what it's processing. This creates a system that's both specialized and adaptive. Each agent gets better at its specific task, because that's all it does. The orchestrator ensures that the right specialist handles the right work. A research expert doesn't spend cycles on deal qualification, and a qualification expert doesn't waste time on strategy development. Everyone focuses. The pattern also improves reliability. In a single agent system, if the agent fails or gets stuck on a difficult case, everything halts. In an orchestrator pattern, if one specialist agent fails, the orchestrator knows about it. It can retry that agent with a different prompt. It can escalate to a human, or it can route to an alternative agent if one exists. The failure of one component doesn't collapse the entire system. And there's a capacity benefit. A single agent might handle 50 accounts daily. 5 specialist agents, each coordinated by an orchestrator, can handle significantly more. The work distributes. The throughput increases. The latency decreases because work happens in parallel instead of waiting in a line. Context switching also drops. Each agent stays focused on its domain. It doesn't have to shift mental models throughout the day. It gets deeper at what it does and better at catching the subtle patterns that matter in its specialty. The orchestrator pattern is where the architecture moves from having agents to having agent systems. That's where the real scaling begins. Sequential versus concurrent orchestration. The orchestrator pattern we just described works when agents perform work in sequence. One finishes, another begins. The output of the first becomes the input for the second. This creates a clear, predictable chain. But it's not the only way orchestration can work. And for certain types of problems, it's actually the wrong way. Understanding the difference between sequential and concurrent orchestration is about matching your architecture to the actual nature of the problem you're solving. In sequential orchestration, agents execute one after another in a defined order. Think of it like an assembly line. The research agent completes its work on an account and hands its findings to the qualification agent. The qualification agent uses that research to assess fit, then hands off to the strategy agent, which uses both the research and the qualification assessment to recommend an approach. Each step depends on the output of the previous step. Each agent needs that prior context to do its job well. The advantage of sequential is straightforward. Your logic is simple. You know exactly what happens in what order. The handoff points are clear. If something goes wrong at step 2, you know exactly what state the system was in at that moment. Debugging is easier. Reliability is easier to reason about. But there's a cost, time. If each agent takes 5 seconds to complete its work, 3 agents working sequentially takes 15 seconds total. That adds up when you're processing hundreds of accounts daily. Concurrent orchestration flips this. Multiple agents work at the same time on the same problem. The research agent, sentiment analysis agent, and competitor mapping agent all process the same account simultaneously. Each one operates independently without waiting for the others. Once all 3 finish, the orchestrator merges their outputs. The benefit is speed. 3 agents running in parallel take roughly the time of 1 agent. Same 5-second baseline, but all 3 complete within that window instead of sequentially. The latency drops dramatically. The trade-off is complexity. Merging outputs from independent agents isn't always straightforward. If one agent concludes that the account is a perfect fit and another concludes it's a poor fit, which one is right? How do you reconcile conflicting signals? The orchestrator needs logic to detect these conflicts and either resolve them or surface them for human judgment. The choice between sequential and concurrent depends on your workflow's actual structure. For lead qualification, sequential often makes sense. You need to know what you're researching before you assess fit, and you need to assess fit before you recommend a strategy. The steps build on each other. The dependencies are real. For account intelligence gathering, concurrent makes more sense. Research, sentiment analysis, and competitor tracking don't depend on each other. They're parallel work streams. You benefit from having all three completed quickly rather than waiting for them sequentially. The dependencies are weaker. In practice, most complex workflows end up being hybrid. Some steps run sequentially because they depend on each other. Other steps run in parallel because they're independent. The orchestrator coordinates the mix. It understands which agents need to wait for prior steps and which can work in parallel. The orchestrator decides the execution pattern based on the task it's processing. This is why the orchestrator is intelligent, not just a router. It reads the incoming work, understands its characteristics, and determines the execution strategy that makes sense for that specific piece of work. This adaptability is where the pattern becomes powerful. You're not locked into one execution model. You optimize based on what you're actually trying to accomplish in each moment. The system becomes both fast and reliable because it's designed for the real structure of the work, not for an oversimplified model of how work flows. API rate limits and throttling. Your architecture is built on syncs, agents, and orchestrators, but all of it operates within a cage. And understanding the bars of that cage isn't optional, it's foundational, because the moment you ignore these constraints, your system breaks. LinkedIn enforces rate limits on its APIs. That's not a surprise. What might surprise you is how tight they actually are. Take the Sales Navigator API, it caps out at roughly 1,000 leads and contacts per user. Per month, 1,000. Per month, not per day. This isn't a soft suggestion or a goal to aim for. It's a hard ceiling. When you hit it, you hit it. The system simply stops accepting your requests. Over on the Dynamics 365 side, the constraints look different, but they're just as real. Dynamics has service protection limits. They exist to stop one single user's integration from slowing down the entire environment for everyone else. Those limits are set at 6,000 requests within any 5-minute sliding window. Think about that. In a 5-minute span, if you cross that 6,000 call mark, you're done. You get an HTTP 429 error. Too many requests? Power Automate sits in the middle and it has its own tax. Each user gets about 40,000 API requests every 24 hours depending on their license. That sounds like a massive number until you realize a single misconfigured flow can burn through that in minutes. One loop calling an API incorrectly, and your daily budget is gone. These limits aren't arbitrary penalties. They aren't there to make your life difficult. They're protective mechanisms. They keep the service stable in a world where millions of organizations are running millions of integrations at the same time. They enforce fairness across the platform. When you exceed a limit, the system sends back that 429 status code and a retry after header. That header tells you exactly how long to wait before trying again. It's not a suggestion, it's a contract. If the header says wait 60 seconds, you wait 60 seconds. If you ignore the signal and keep hammering the API, the throttling gets aggressive, the back-off time multiplies. Your requests get slower and slower until the system essentially stops talking to you. The practical reality is this: you cannot design integrations that assume unlimited throughput. You have to build for these constraints from day one. Batching is the first way to lower the pressure. Instead of updating one contact at a time in a loop, you batch 100 contacts into a single request. That counts as one API call instead of 100. The math changes instantly. You go from burning your entire Power Automate allocation on a few thousand records to processing hundreds of thousands without breaking a sweat. Asynchronous patterns help too. Instead of making calls in a tight loop where you wait for each one to finish, you queue the work, you process it in the background, the concurrent load drops, the API gets breathing room, and you get better throughput because you aren't holding connections open while you wait. The governance side of this is where things get serious. Some organizations hit a limit and think they can just create 5 different app registrations to split the work. Use app 1 for half the load and app 2 for the rest. Double the quota. That logic is tempting until Microsoft detects the pattern and blocks you. Using multiple apps specifically to bypass rate limits is prohibited, and the detection is getting better every day. It's not something you can hide. This architecture forces you to value efficiency. You can't brute force your way through integration problems. You have to be thoughtful about how you batch data and how you structure the work. This isn't a sign of bad design. It's the boundary that separates systems that scale from systems that eventually collapse. The 100-second synchronous timeout. Power Automate has a structural constraint that hits harder than rate limits. Any flow that calls an external system synchronously, meaning it sits there and waits for a response, has exactly 100 seconds to finish. Not 105, 100 seconds. After that threshold, Power Automate kills the execution. The flow fails, and whatever called that flow gets nothing back. This is a massive deal when agents are involved. An agent uses a Power Automate flow as a tool. It makes a request, waits for the data, and uses that data to think. But the agent has a time budget too. If your flow takes 110 seconds, the agent times out. The intelligence it was building collapses. The entire exchange fails. This constraint forces discipline. You have to keep the synchronous part fast. You call LinkedIn. You get the data. You return it immediately. No complex transformations, no long sequential loops, no waiting on 3 other systems. You just accept the request, fetch the data, and respond. When you need to do something slow, and most real work is slow, you have to split the logic. The synchronous part accepts the request and queues it. It returns a tracking ID right away. Then, an asynchronous part runs separately in the background to do the heavy lifting. It handles the complex math. It calls the multiple APIs. It takes all the time it needs. When it's done, it stores the result and notifies the system. Let's look at a real example. An agent needs to enrich a contact with LinkedIn data. It's not just a name and title. It's a full analysis of their recent activity, engagement patterns, and buying signals. That analysis is heavy. It takes multiple API calls and a lot of data processing. You cannot do that in 100 seconds while an agent is holding its breath. So the synchronous flow does this. It accepts the request for the contact. It validates the data. It drops the work into a processing queue. And it returns a tracking ID. The agent gets its answer in 2 seconds. It knows the work is happening. It can move on to other tasks. Meanwhile, the asynchronous flow wakes up. It sees the work in the queue. It calls the LinkedIn APIs, runs the calculations, and saves the enriched record back to Dynamics 365. The whole process might take 3 minutes, but it doesn't matter because nobody is waiting for it. This adds complexity to your build. You aren't building one flow anymore. You're building 2 paths that have to talk to each other through a queue. You need monitoring on both sides. You need logic to handle what happens if the work finishes but the caller is gone. But this complexity is the only way to be reliable at scale. The alternative is trying to do everything at once. You keep the agent waiting, you pray the API responds fast, and eventually you hit a timeout. You get failed requests, you get frustrated users, you get agents that break and don't know why. Timeouts are technical rules, but they point to a deeper principle. Separate the fast path from the slow path. Do what must be immediate synchronously. Queue everything else. That separation is what keeps your system alive when the workload gets heavy. Data governance and compliance risk. Constraints shape your architecture, but they come in 2 forms. You have technical constraints like rate limits and timeouts that force you to design for efficiency. Then you have regulatory constraints like data protection laws that force you to design for ethics. Both matter equally. The governance challenge starts with a simple question. Where did this data actually come from? If you are syncing LinkedIn contacts into Dynamics 365 through the official Sales Navigator CRM sync, the answer is easy. It is an official integration. It is sanctioned by both LinkedIn and Microsoft. The data flow is documented and the terms are clear. But things change when you step outside those lines. If someone builds a custom HTTP connector to call undocumented LinkedIn endpoints, or if a Power Automate flow is running a third-party scraping tool, you have a problem. Using browser automation to extract profiles at scale violates LinkedIn's terms of service, and more importantly, it often violates data protection laws. GDPR does not care how clever your integration is. It requires a lawful basis for collecting personal data. And LinkedIn profiles are definitely personal data. You cannot just claim the data was publicly available on the platform. GDPR does not recognize that as a lawful excuse. You need consent, a defensible business interest, or a contractual obligation. Simply wanting to prospect someone is not enough. The person's expectation matters. They shared their profile within LinkedIn's ecosystem, not so it could be bulk extracted for your CRM. This gets worse when you start combining different data sources. If you take a LinkedIn profile and match it with employee records or data from a broker, you are now profiling people. Combining disparate data to score or rank individuals triggers much higher scrutiny under GDPR and similar laws. Your regulatory burden increases and your transparency requirements become much stricter. The enforcement mechanism here is actually very simple. Use official APIs and sanctioned integrations only. Sales Navigator CRM Sync is official. The compliance APIs. LinkedIn publishers for regulated industries are official. Custom HTTP calls to unpublished endpoints are not. Power Automate flows that script browser automation are not. The line is clear even if the incentive to cross it is tempting. DLP policies act as your governance fence. You need to restrict which Power Automate connectors can handle data sourced from LinkedIn. You can configure your tenant so that generic HTTP connectors cannot receive data from lead records that started in LinkedIn. You can also restrict the export of contact lists to only approved destinations. Blocking unknown external services prevents data leakage. These policies stop a flow from accidentally or intentionally sending prospect data somewhere it should not go. Audit trails are how you prove you are following the rules. Native Dynamics 365 logging captures who accessed what data, when they did it, and why. The system records every API call, every record view, and every data export. If a compliance auditor asks to see everyone who touched a specific contact record, you have the full history. Custom scrapers operate in the dark and generate no audit trail. When something goes wrong, you cannot reconstruct what happened. The compliance risk compounds because once this data enters your system, you are responsible for it. You are now the data controller. LinkedIn is no longer the primary custodian. You own the obligation to secure it, respond to data requests, and delete it when necessary. If you scrape that data through unauthorized means, you are starting from a position of violation. The entire relationship is tainted from day one. The business consequences are massive. GDPR fines can reach 20 million euros or 4% of your global annual revenue. In California, CCPA violations can hit $1,500 per person. A single aggressive scraping campaign that harvests 10,000 profiles could generate fines in the tens of millions. That is not a theoretical threat. That is the enforcement reality we are seeing in 2026. The governance implication is straightforward. Treat LinkedIn data like regulated data. Apply the same controls you would use for financial records. Restrict the access, audit the usage, document your lawful basis, respect the rights of the people behind the data. This is not just bureaucracy, it is foundation building. Organizations that move data through official channels can scale with confidence. Those that take shortcuts live in perpetual risk. Constraints and risks shape your architecture. They are not obstacles. They are guardrails. They define the only path you can actually walk safely. Building the unified system. Everything we have covered so far, the APIs, the syncs, the health scoring, Copilot, and the governance, all fits into a single architecture. This is not just a collection of features. It is a coherent system where every layer depends on the others and nothing works in isolation. Think of this unified system as 3 distinct layers. Each one has a specific responsibility, and the system only works when all 3 function together. The extraction layer is where it starts. This is where data enters the system. Sales Navigator CRM Sync brings in leads and engagement signals from LinkedIn on a daily schedule. Dynamics 365 Relationship health scoring calculates strength based on the activity already captured in your CRM. Email interactions, calls, meetings, and LinkedIn messages all feed into this layer. This layer answers one question: what is actually happening in the relationship? The data flows in continuously. It is not a batch job that runs once a week. As activity happens, the signals flow. The reasoning layer sits right above extraction. This is where meaning is created. Copilot synthesizes that extracted data into actionable insights. It reads the CRM records, the LinkedIn signals, and the Outlook history to generate a narrative. It tells you why a relationship is healthy or why it is declining. It answers the question of what should happen next and where your attention should go. This is also where your agents operate. The sales research agent takes the raw data and finds patterns that are not immediately obvious. The sales development agent qualifies leads based on that data to make judgments about fit and priority. The reasoning layer does not create new data. It turns existing data into intelligence. The action layer executes decisions based on that intelligence. Power Automate flows route qualified leads from the reasoning layer to the right sellers. If a lead comes through tagged as enterprise segment, the flow routes it to your enterprise team. If a relationship health score drops below a certain threshold, the flow generates an alert for the account owner. When an agent recommends that a contact needs a follow-up, the flow creates a task for the seller. The action layer turns your insight into actual motion. The system is continuous because the data never stops moving. A prospect opens an email from a seller and that activity is logged immediately. The relationship health updates and Copilot sees the new signal. The reasoning layer then adjusts its assessment. If that activity moves the relationship from fair to good health, the action layer removes any at-risk escalation that was triggered. The system evolves as reality evolves. You are not working from reports that were accurate last week. You are working from real-time truth. The benefit here is not just about efficiency, even though efficiency matters. The core benefit is the quality of your decisions. A seller preparing for a call does not have to guess at what matters because Copilot shows them. They see the health trends, the recent engagement, and which internal stakeholders are involved. They make decisions based on current information. They are not relying on memory or assumptions or fragments of context scattered across different systems. They have integrated, accurate information. The architecture is designed for reality, not for an ideal world where everything is perfect. API limits exist, so the system batches and throttles your data intelligently. Timeouts happen, so the synchronous and asynchronous work is separated cleanly. Governance requirements are real, so the system logs everything and respects your access boundaries. The architecture is not fighting these constraints, it is built around them. The system is fully auditable. Every action is logged. If an agent makes a decision about whether to prioritize a lead, that decision is recorded. The reasoning is traceable. If a seller acts on a recommendation from Copilot, that moment is logged. If a Power Automate flow escalates an account, the trigger condition is documented. When something goes wrong, you can reconstruct exactly what happened and why. This matters for your operations because it helps you improve the system. It matters legally because auditors want to see the decision trail. It matters competitively because you finally understand what is working. This is the unified system. Extraction feeds reasoning. Reasoning feeds action. The whole thing runs in a loop. Data flows in, intelligence emerges, and decisions execute. And because every step is transparent, you can actually explain every decision the system makes. Implementation roadmap. The architecture makes sense on paper. But you cannot build the whole thing at once. You just can't. Your organization isn't ready for it. Your team doesn't have the skills yet. You haven't proven the value to the people holding the budget. If you try to deploy everything at the same time, you will burn through your credibility and your cash. The roadmap breaks this down into 4 phases over 12 months. Each phase delivers its own value. Each phase prepares the ground for the next one. Phase 1 covers months 1 through 3. This is about the foundation. The goal is to get LinkedIn data flowing into Dynamics 365 without any custom code. You enable Sales Navigator CRM Sync and let it run daily. You get your leads syncing and watch the integration to find the basic bugs. At the same time, you configure your relationship health scoring. Start simple. Set your activity weights based on what you think matters right now. Maybe an email is worth 3 points, a call is 4, and a meeting is 5. You can always adjust those numbers later when you have real data to look at. You also need to train your sales team on the native LinkedIn features that are already in the product. Show them the Sales Navigator card in their contact forms. Show them Team Link. Show them how to create a lead directly from LinkedIn. This phase takes 90 days because change management is slow. People need time to get used to new tools. Early wins are what matter here. When sellers start seeing enriched contact records without doing any manual work, they stop resisting. They see the value. That is the goal of phase 1. Value visibility. Phase 2 runs from month 4 to month 6. Now you layer in the intelligence. You deploy Copilot for sales. This is where the system starts synthesizing information. Start with the features that feel natural to your sellers. Meeting prep is easy to understand. Email drafting makes immediate sense. Opportunity summaries give managers the visibility they need. You should also implement data loss prevention policies at this stage. Restrict which connectors can handle your LinkedIn data. You have to govern the flow of relationship intelligence. This phase is about bringing AI into the workflow without breaking the workflow. Sellers should feel like Copilot is helping them, not trying to replace them. The relationship health scoring you started in phase 1 is now feeding into Copilot insights. Sales managers can use Copilot to see which accounts are at risk. They can see which relationships are cooling and which opportunities are actually moving. This is about intelligence surfacing, not autonomous agents yet. Phase 3 happens in months 7 through 9. This is where autonomy enters the picture. You deploy the sales agent for lead research and qualification. These agents start taking over work that used to require human time. Let them research the accounts. Let them qualify the leads. Let them map out the buying committees. You build Power Automate flows that route those qualified leads to the right sellers based on territory and skill. Set up your escalation rules. If a relationship health score drops below your threshold for a strategic account, the system sends an alert to the owner. No more manual monitoring. No more checking dashboards every Monday. It is a real-time signal. You are introducing autonomous work into the sales process. This is where change management gets harder because you are asking people to trust the system with decisions they used to make themselves. But if the first 2 phases went well, that trust is already there. Sellers have seen Copilot work. They have seen the health scores develop accurately. They are ready to let the system take the first pass at qualification. Phase 4 is months 10 through 12. Optimization. You have the full system running. Now you measure it. You look at the data to see which agents are actually effective. You track the KPIs to see which flows are generating the most value. Look at your cycle time, your win rate, and your deal size. If those are improving, you have your evidence. If they are not, you debug the process. Are the agents missing the right signals? Are the flows routing leads to the wrong people? Are the sellers just ignoring what the system recommends? You refine everything based on the outcomes. You adjust the agent prompts. You improve the orchestration logic. Then you expand the agents to other use cases. If the research agent works for new business, try using it for renewals and expansion. The system matures because you iterate on it. Each phase delivers something real. You aren't building in the dark and waiting for a final product. You are delivering value in increments. You are earning credibility. You are building muscle in the team. By the time you reach phase 4, the system is operating at scale because you took 9 months to make it work. You didn't rush. You didn't cut corners. You just made steady progress. That is how you actually implement this. The governance challenge. By phase 4, you have a real system running. Multiple agents are making decisions. Copilot is synthesizing intelligence across thousands of interactions every single day. Power Automate flows are routing leads and escalating accounts. The volume is high. And this is when you discover the thing nobody warns you about. Autonomous systems at scale require constant oversight. It is not that agents are dangerous. They aren't. But when you have dozens of agents making thousands of micro decisions every day, you need to see what they are doing. You need to know if one of them starts acting strange. You have to catch those problems before they cascade through the system. The governance framework starts with an inventory. You have to know which agents exist in your organization. That seems obvious, but it usually isn't. In companies without discipline, agents just proliferate. One team builds a research agent, another team builds a qualification agent for their specific segment. Someone in operations builds a churn detection agent. They all live in different Copilot studio environments. They use different data. They use different naming conventions. Nobody has a central registry. When something breaks, nobody even knows what depends on it. A centralized agent inventory changes that. You need a registry that lists every agent in production. It shows who owns it, what it does, and what data it connects to. This becomes your single source of truth. It doesn't have to be complicated. A spreadsheet works just fine. What matters is that the information exists in one place and stays current. Change control is where governance becomes real. Before an agent goes into production, someone has to review it. This isn't just a technical check to see if it crashes. It is a business review. Does this agent respect our data policies? Does it align with how we want to sell? Does it make decisions that match our values? If a research agent overweights company size and ignores growth stage, it might route high-growth startups away from your enterprise team. That is a governance failure. You have to catch that before the agent touches a real opportunity. Monitoring is the part that never stops. You need telemetry on every agent you have running. How many leads did it process this week? What percentage did it qualify versus reject? What do the confidence scores look like? When the qualification accuracy drops, that is your signal. It means something changed. Maybe the underlying model drifted. Maybe the data quality got worse. Maybe the market changed and the agent is looking for the wrong things. The metrics tell you there is a problem, so you can go investigate it. Incident response is your emergency process. When an agent goes wrong, and they will go wrong eventually, you need a documented way to handle it. Does the agent have a circuit breaker? Can you pause it quickly if it starts making bad calls? Can you roll back to the version that worked? You need to be able to isolate it so it stops processing work while you fix the issue. These processes stop a single mistake from corrupting your entire database. Audit trails are just as important. Every decision an agent makes needs to be logged. You don't just log the outcome. You log the reasoning, the confidence score, and the data the agent was looking at. This creates a complete record. When something fails, you can replay the event. You can see exactly what the agent saw and why it made that choice. You can tell if the error was in the logic or in the data. Your governance should match how your organization already works. If your company has rules for how humans make decisions, the agents should follow those same patterns. If a salesperson has to document why they disqualified an account, the agent should do the same thing. If managers review human decisions once a month, they should review agent decisions too. Consistency is what builds trust. This isn't about putting handcuffs on your agents. It is the opposite. Governance is what makes agents trustworthy. When you can prove that a decision is documented and reversible, people will actually use the system. When governance is missing, agents become black boxes. People stop trusting them. They stop using them. And then all that investment in automation just gets abandoned. The reality is clear. Governance is not overhead. It is the foundation that lets you operate at scale. Without it, you are just hoping for the best. With it, you actually know what is happening. The seller's changing role. Governance keeps the system honest, but there is a deeper question underneath all of this. As the automation handles more of the work, what actually happens to the people doing the selling? The honest answer is that their job transforms. It doesn't disappear, but it changes fundamentally. In the old model, sellers wore multiple hats. They researched prospects by digging through LinkedIn and company websites and news articles to understand who they were talking to. They gathered information and spent hours on research before moving data around, logging activities into the CRM and updating fields. They created follow-up tasks and responded to admin overhead. Then, if time remained, they actually sold. They had conversations, they built relationships, they moved deals forward. The research hat and the administrative hat consumed enormous time. Studies show that sellers spend 70% of their day on non-selling activities. 70%. Research, data entry, CRM maintenance, internal meetings, and administrative overhead take up the bulk of their schedule. And then somehow they were expected to close deals with the 30% of time remaining. In the new model, agents and automation handle the research. They handle the data entry. They manage the administrative overhead. What remains is the work that actually matters. Relationship building, deal making, strategy. This doesn't mean the seller role shrinks. It means the role transforms. The seller becomes 4 things instead of 1. First, a relationship steward. This is the core of selling. It is about understanding what a customer actually needs and building trust through conversations where you listen more than you talk. Showing the customer that you understand their world is a skill that cannot be automated. An agent cannot build a relationship because only a human can do that. The agent prepares the groundwork by researching the company, identifying the buying committee, and understanding the competitive landscape. The seller walks in knowing all of that, then the seller does what only a seller can do, which is to connect with the person across the table. They find common ground and make the customer feel understood. That is stewardship. That is the foundation. Second, a strategic advisor. Customers do not want salespeople who just pitch products. They want advisors who help them think. When you understand what a customer is trying to accomplish, your job is to help them think through the options. What is the best approach? What are the risks? Where have we seen this go wrong? Where have we seen it go right? This requires judgment and wisdom. It is the kind of insight that comes from seeing hundreds of situations and understanding patterns. Agents can provide information, but they cannot provide wisdom. The seller does that. Third, a deal maker. After all the relationship building and strategic advising, someone has to close. Someone has to negotiate. Someone has to handle the moment when the customer hesitates and you need to understand why. Is it price? Is it uncertainty about implementation? Is it organizational politics inside their company? The seller navigates that. The agent prepared everything, but the seller closes it. That is a different skill. Fourth, an agent manager. This is new. Sellers are becoming supervisors of AI. An agent brings them a list of qualified leads, and the seller's job is to direct it. They focus on specific accounts first and deprioritize others. They might tell the agent to spend more research time on a certain segment. The seller becomes the one who makes sure the automation is pointed in the right direction. They interpret the agent's output and judge whether the recommendations make sense. They know when to trust the agent and when to override it. That is management. The time freed up by automation is the opportunity. A seller who uses that time to deepen relationships will outperform someone who uses it to handle more transactions. The bar moves, the capability ceiling rises, speed matters less, quality of relationship matters more. The skill shift is substantial. Sellers need to be comfortable with AI. Not technically proficient, just comfortable. They need to know what agents can and cannot do. They need to interpret recommendations critically. They need to know when an agent is right and when it is missing something humans see immediately. The compensation model probably needs to rethink itself too. If agents are doing prospecting, activity-based compensation does not make sense anymore. You cannot measure a seller by dials or emails when an agent is doing that work. Outcome metrics matter more. Did you close the deal? What was the deal size? How long did it take? What is the customer's satisfaction? These become the measures. Organizations that manage this transition cleanly will see real productivity gains. Those that ignore the change will see sellers ignoring the system, confused about their role, and doing the old work in new tools. The role itself is solid. The transition is the hard part. Organizational implications. The traditional sales hierarchy assumes a specific shape. SDRs prospect, AES close, managers oversee activity. The structure is built around the assumption that humans do the prospecting and qualification work. That assumption is now broken. When agents handle prospecting, the SDR role becomes a decision point. Some organizations will eliminate it entirely. Why hire someone to research prospects when an agent does it for free? The work that justified the role no longer exists. Other organizations will evolve the role. The SDR becomes an agent manager. They do not research prospects themselves. They direct agents where to focus. They refine agent prompts based on what the market is telling them. They handle the accounts that the agent flagged as complex or borderline. There is still a human in the process, but they are doing different work. A third path is specialization. Instead of generalist SDRs, you hire specialists. One person focuses on account research while another focuses on competitive intelligence. A third person handles buying committee mapping. Agents do prospecting volume, but specialists do depth. The SDR role does not disappear, but it transforms into a portfolio of specialized functions. The AE role shifts in a different direction. AES no longer spend time prospecting for opportunities because the agents surface those. AES focus on complex deals and key accounts. Their job is to take what the agent qualified and move it forward. The qualification might be solid, the prospect fits, the buying signal is real, and the timing is good. But closing a complex deal requires human judgment. It requires understanding organizational politics. It requires negotiating when the customer wants terms you cannot give. It requires judgment about when to escalate, when to walk away, and when to bring in other resources. These are things agents cannot do. AEs become premium resources deployed against the deals that matter most. Management shifts in parallel. Sales managers stop obsessing over activity metrics like calls made, emails sent, and meetings booked. Those metrics do not matter anymore when agents handle volume. Managers focus on coaching. If a seller just lost a deal, the manager's job is to understand why and help them think through what would have worked differently. If a team closed deals faster than the industry average, the manager's job is to understand the pattern and teach it to others. If a seller is struggling with a specific customer type, the manager's job is to help them see what they are missing. Activity management becomes strategy coaching. The organizational structure itself might flatten. If agents handle routine prospecting and qualification, you need fewer layers between frontline sellers and leadership. The structure compresses, or it might specialize instead. Rather than geography-based territories or company size-based segments, you organize by use case. One division handles new business while another handles expansion in existing accounts. A third division handles renewals. Each division has sellers optimized for that motion. Agents handle discovery and qualification across all three, and humans specialize in what matters to each division. The key insight is this: organizational structure should reflect the work that actually needs doing. If agents do prospecting, do not keep SDR headcount. If AEs do not do research, do not spend their time on it. If managers are not counting activities, do not measure them. The structure should align with where human value is created. This is not a one-time reorganization. As agents become more capable, the organization will evolve again. Maybe in 2 years, agents can handle early negotiation, which changes the AE role further. Maybe they can handle relationship maintenance on renewal deals, which changes how you staff that segment. The structure that works today will not work in 18 months. The competitive advantage goes to organizations that adapt quickly. Those that cling to old structures by keeping SDRs doing work agents do better, measuring sellers on activities agents handle, and organizing by geography. When agents have already researched the target accounts will lag behind. They are paying for work that does not need to exist anymore. The next frontier, multi-agent B2B. Everything we've covered so far assumes your sales agents are only on one side of the table. Your organization builds agents to research prospects, to qualify leads, to prepare opportunities. But the person on the other side, the buyer, is still a human being. Your agent informs your seller persuades the buyer. That assumption is about to break. The next shift in this architecture is multi-agent B2B. It's your agents negotiating with buyer agents. It isn't your seller talking to their buyer anymore. It's your algorithm talking to their algorithm. Gartner predicts that by 2028, 90% of B2B purchases will be mediated by AI agents. Think about that number for a second. It's not that AI touches the transaction at some point. It's that agents are mediating the entire process. Agents making the actual buying decision. Agents negotiating the terms. Agents closing the deals. This isn't a hypothetical future. Early versions of buyer agents are already running in the wild. Companies like Cooper and Ariba are building them right now. These agents live inside procurement departments when a company needs to buy software licenses or cloud infrastructure. The buyer agent steps in. It already understands the budget constraints. It knows the approved vendors. It knows the preferred terms. It can evaluate proposals and make buying decisions on its own, or with almost no human help. When that world becomes the standard, everything changes. Your sales agent can't win by doing what it does today. Right now, it's trying to persuade a human. It looks for emotional hooks. It tries to appeal to a person's values and goals. But all of that is irrelevant when the buyer isn't a person. A buyer agent doesn't care about your story. It cares about parameters, price, delivery timelines, feature sets, compliance. The buyer agent has a scorecard. Every vendor gets rated against that scorecard. The winner is simply the one that scores highest within the company's constraints. Your sales agent has to understand that logic. It has to know what the buyer agent is optimizing for. If the buyer agent gives you an 8 out of 10 on cost, what specific change would push you to a 9? What would drop you to a 7? These are the only questions that matter now. The negotiation shifts entirely. It's no longer, let me tell you why we're better. It becomes, I see you're optimizing for speed and compliance. The conversation is analytical, not persuasive. It's optimization, not selling. Your agent still needs to negotiate, but it looks different. The buyer agent might send back a counter-proposal. Your agent has to evaluate it instantly, not just against your profit targets, but against what your company can actually deliver. Can you hit that timeline without breaking your quality standards? Can you bundle services to meet their cost cap? Can you suggest an alternative that scores better for them than their own original request? Escalation becomes the new safety valve. Some deals will be too messy for agent-to-agent talk. There might be stakeholders with conflicting priorities, or a deal that needs custom work outside your standard model. Your agent has to recognize these moments. It needs to escalate to a human at the right time. Not too early, because that wastes time, but exactly when it's hit the limit of its logic. The sales playbook is being rewritten. Instead of building rapport, it's understanding parameters. Instead of telling a story, it's providing transparent data. Instead of overcoming objections, it's solving constraints. This requires you to prepare your foundation now. You have to test your agent against buyer-agent logic. You have to define which deals it can close alone and which ones need a human hand. You need guardrails. What's your absolute floor on margin? What delivery dates are actually possible? Organizations building this foundation today will have a massive lead. If you wait until buyer agents are everywhere, you're already behind. The time to start thinking about agent-to-agent negotiation is right now. Building the foundation for what's next. Multi-agent B2B isn't some distant idea, it's a direction with a deadline. The companies that will win in that world aren't the ones who start when the buyer agents show up. They're the ones who started building the infrastructure years ago. The good news is you don't have to predict the exact future to get ready. You just need a foundation that's flexible enough to adapt. The architecture we've talked about today isn't just for current problems. It's the substrate that makes future problems solvable. That foundation relies on 3 things that compound each other. If you miss one, the other 2 only work half as well. The first is data integration. Every piece of customer data has to flow into a central system like Dynamics 365. Not just the easy data, all of it. LinkedIn signals, email threads, call recordings, usage data, support tickets. When a buyer agent evaluates you against a scorecard, your agent needs to pull from every dimension of that relationship. It can only do that if the data is in one place and ready to be queried. If your data is fragmented, some in CRM, some in spreadsheets, some in people's heads, your agent will have massive reasoning gaps. The second is AI-ready architecture. This means designing your systems assuming agents will be the ones using them. Systems built for humans look like dashboards and forms. Systems built for agents look like APIs and structured data. If you build a Dynamics environment where everything is locked in custom UI forms, agents can't interact with it. But if you structure your decisions and activities in Dataverse with clear schemas, agents can reason about the data and act immediately. The design choice you make today determines if an agent can even function in 2 years. The third is governance by default. This isn't something you bolt on after a problem happens. It's built into the design from day one. You need access controls that know which agents can see which files. You need audit trails that capture every decision automatically. You need logging that explains not just what happened, but why the system did it. Companies that treat governance as an afterthought spend years fixing it later. Companies that build it in from the start don't have that debt. The architecture already knows how to explain itself to a regulator. These three things, integration, architecture, and governance, aren't separate. They reinforce each other. Good integration makes agents smarter. Clean architecture makes governance easier to run. Built-in governance makes the whole system trustworthy, which leads to better data, which leads to better reasoning. The takeaway is simple. Start now. Not because every part of multi-agent B2B is ready today, but because the foundation takes time to build. The organizations already building it are gaining an advantage every single month. While everyone else is waiting, they're compounding their lead. If this changed how you think about the future of sales, follow me, Mirko Peters, on LinkedIn. And if you want more of this, leave a review. It helps more people find the show. Share this with your team, especially if you're looking at your AI strategy right now. The risks you need to know. Building the foundation is necessary, but foundation building without clear-eyed risk awareness produces brittle systems. The risks here aren't theoretical edge cases, they are documented failure modes, and organizations are already encountering them as they deploy this architecture at scale. Algorithmic bias is the first one most people don't see coming. Agents learn from historical data. If your sales records show that senior sellers always got the big accounts while junior sellers took the rest, the agent will replicate that pattern. It doesn't know that the pattern reflects historical bias rather than strategic intent. It sees a correlation, and then it acts on it. The result is a system that systematically disadvantages certain prospect types or demographics. This doesn't happen because anyone intended it. It happens because the data said so. The mitigation is deliberate. You have to audit your training data before you build agents on top of it. Understand what patterns are embedded in your historical records. If the pattern reflects a bias you want to correct it before the agent learns it. Hallucination is the second risk. Copilot and agents are language models at their core. Language models generate plausible-sounding output. When the underlying data is ambiguous or incomplete, they can generate output that sounds authoritative but is factually wrong. A meeting prep brief might describe a prospect as operating in a market they exited 2 years ago. A relationship health summary might say engagement is strong when the last real interaction was 6 months ago. A lead score might reflect a model's confidence, not actual fit. Sellers who trust these outputs uncritically can make decisions based on wrong information. The mitigation is a culture of critical engagement. Sellers need to treat agent outputs as hypotheses to verify, not facts to act on. The system needs prominent uncertainty indicators like confidence scores and data freshness timestamps. This ensures sellers know when to double-check before acting. Over-reliance follows from hallucination if you're not careful. When agents perform well consistently, sellers stop questioning them. They execute recommendations without thinking. The agent says, call this person today. They call. The agent says, deprioritize this account. They deprioritize. That uncritical trust is dangerous because agents fail in ways humans don't anticipate. The failure isn't dramatic. It's quiet. It is a slow drift in recommendation quality that goes unnoticed because nobody is checking. The mitigation is embedding human review into the process even when the agent is performing well. You need regular spot checks. Managers should pull a sample of agent decisions and evaluate them independently. Keep sellers sharp by requiring them to articulate why they're following a recommendation. Data privacy risk scales as agents access more. The intelligence layer touches emails, calls, and meeting transcripts. That breadth of access is what makes the reasoning powerful. It's also what makes governance essential. Every new data source an agent can access is a new surface area for exposure. When an agent can read email threads, it might surface a message that contains sensitive client information the seller didn't intend to share. When an agent can access call transcripts, it processes potentially confidential conversations. The mitigation is role-based access that applies as strictly to agents as to humans. An agent shouldn't see data its human counterpart isn't authorized to see. Regulatory risk compounds when agents make decisions at scale. A single discriminatory decision by a human is an isolated incident. The same pattern embedded in an agent runs at volume. Thousands of decisions reflecting that pattern happen before anyone notices. That's regulatory exposure. Intelligent monitoring is what catches these patterns early. You must track decision distributions across demographic and firmographic dimensions. Vendor lock-in is quieter but equally consequential. An architecture built entirely on Dynamics 365 and Copilot is an architecture that becomes expensive to change. Features, data schemas, and agent logic all get embedded in Microsoft's ecosystem. When Microsoft changes pricing or evolves the platform in ways that don't suit your needs, the cost of moving is enormous. Design with portability in mind from the beginning. Use clean data models. Use abstracted integration layers. Build agent logic that could be ported if necessary. Change management failure is perhaps the most preventable risk. If sellers don't trust the system, they ignore it. All the architecture in the world doesn't produce results if the people it's designed to help won't use it. Trust gets built through demonstrated accuracy over time. Start with high visibility wins. Let sellers see the system get it right before you ask them to depend on it. Your CRM was blind without LinkedIn. Your LinkedIn account was isolated without Dynamics 365. The unified system, extraction, reasoning, action, closes that gap. It turns two half pictures into one coherent view of every relationship that matters to your business. This isn't a product release. It's a structural shift in how sales organizations operate. The organizations building this foundation now won't need to scramble when buyer agents arrive. They will be ready when the market moves at machine speed. If this episode changed how you think about the architecture of modern selling, follow me, Mirko Peters, on LinkedIn. And if you want more of this, subscribe for more.